Hello, today is June 30th, Tuesday, 2020. My name is Jackie Pelota. I'm interviewing Rosana Resende for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I'll honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. Okay. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we move on. Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes, I do.
Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I do.
We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we already filled out. We use that information for the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send it to the Benson, we would strip out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of the public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Sure.
And on occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone number or your email with journalists?
Sure. My email. I'm also filling out paperwork for my son and for
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to share your experiences. So we can, just start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, family, your job, experiences, background.
Okay. I'm a 50-year-old college professor, but I'm actually transitioning to a new job, working with the federal government. I am married. I have a son who's 16, and I live with my husband and my son and my mom, who's 80, and a dog and a cat.
So you talked about kind of being in transition. How is it transitioning jobs right now, given the pandemic?
It's awful. It's very stressful. It's not just transitioning jobs, it's planning a move out of state and being in charge of organizing everything about leaving a house and about entering another house. And health, I've lived in the same place for 20 years, so we all have our doctors and our dentists and veterinarians and our handyman and just all these things that are pretty well established, and thinking about trying to find that in a new place is stressful enough, and trying to set that up with social distancing and with the concerns about travel is really hard, having to find a place to live without being able to go see it. Yeah, it's stressful, less than fun.
Yeah, you talked about, all of the things that you're used to. How long have you been in Florida?
I've been in Florida for 30 some years. A long, since I was 18, a lot. Did I say, yeah, 32, 33 years it'll be this year.
A long time.
Yeah. It's a long time. So I came for college and I stayed. Um, and I didn't think I was moving, but I'm moving. So it's okay. I mean, I'm happy to move, but I'm not happy to move.
So you spoke about other folks that live in your household. Are they transitioning with you to this new location?
Yeah, my husband is probably, he's not resigning from his job. It's a terrible time for him to be able to find a new job somewhere else. And he also has a pretty high post in his position where he works with an NGO. And he doesn't want to leave him in a lurch right now. So he'll be working remotely and coming back to Florida once a month. But yeah, my son and my mom are coming with me because neither one of them is independent. So they have to be where I am because they both depend on me.
Yeah. And what is it that your spouse does?
He's the director for a farm worker advocacy NGO called the Farm Worker Association of Florida.
Oh, okay. Wow. So yeah, definitely not a good time to resign from that type of work.
Right. I mean, I don't know that if he would ever think that it was a good time to resign from that kind of work. Timing notwithstanding, but I didn't make the decision to apply for this job on my own, and I didn't make the decision to move on my own. We talked about it. He not only supported it, he encouraged it. So here we are.
So since you're kind of in the in-between right now, I can maybe jump to what you had previously said that you did, where you were a faculty member. So, you know, I'm interested in hearing how has COVID and you know everything, the pandemic, how has that impact, or how did that impact, you know, your work when you were, you know, fully involved in your work as a faculty member?
Right. So I mean, I had to, and most of the time I really just think of myself as being very, very fortunate that I have work that can be done and can be done meaningfully, virtually, remotely, a lot of the time. Obviously, there are things that are impacted by having to leave campus and suspend face-to-face classes, leave my office, but really, like, can the work continue? It can. Is it the same? No. Some of the things are actually really amazing that happened, in terms of you get more creative about what it means to bring in a guest speaker to a classroom, for instance, because you're not limited by somebody who can physically show up to your classroom anymore. And so now you think about bringing people who are from the outside, and some of the ways in which you're able to create, I think, assignments, not in the middle of the semester, obviously, but thinking about semesters that are starting, create assignments that already are going to take into account sort of like virtual relationships. So things that students normally wouldn't want to do, would put a lot of resistance to, as such as creating an assignment like a learning exchange with people in another country. I teach Latin American studies. And so for students to be able to meaningfully engage with people in Latin America that they're not related to, is a really cool thing that can happen now. And it could have happened before. We didn't need a pandemic because the technology was there. But there was really no drive to innovate altogether if things were working and were working fine, and we privilege class discussion over other kinds of things. So I'm not saying that class discussion isn't important. I think it's seminal. I think it's actually my favorite part about the job is seeing those discussions take off. And I know that students like it and get a lot out of it. But what I'm saying is that there's other stuff that can also happen. And I'm not somebody who's quick to adopt technology into my class. I'm not like super awful about it. I had an online class already. I definitely use the e-learning management, but I'm not somebody who's like, ooh, there's a new toy. Let's figure out an assignment that can play with it. I'm not that person. And so this kind of like forces us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And my new job is also teaching. And so it's weird that I don't get to go into the office, but I've already taught. It's a very different kind of teaching because it's not college students and it's not semester based. It's more training based, but I've already run a full week of courses. Last week, online, virtually, remotely through Zoom, and we'll be doing the same in August. So yeah, I mean, my work's affected. I bought a little table that actually kind of like raises up. I can't do it, I need both hands, but like it raises up so that I can teach standing up, because I really miss teaching standing up. It's tiring because you're not really standing up like you do in a classroom where you stand up, you walk back, you sit on the desk, you come back over. But it allowed me more freedom of movement instead of just sitting down like I'm doing right now. Still squeamish and still fidgety, but it allowed me to sort of like stand back, and I had like a whiteboard. So if I needed to show something right away, like it kind of mimicked the 5% of the classroom environment. So yeah, so in that respect, it was kind of, it's a learning curve. I'll just say that.
Yeah, it seemed though that, you mentioned some of the positives, where you were able to really, expand upon what you were able to do in the classroom, which I think is really interesting. Do you think, kind of thinking about where we're at now, do you think that moving forward within education, and you can talk about like higher education or just education in general, like it will kind of stay that way in terms of like the level of online engagement that people need to participate in now?
What do you mean? You mean like you mean past the pandemic, past the epidemiological concern?
Yeah, and that's, we don't know when that is. So, but yeah, yeah.
I mean, I hope not. I mean, I think we're all afraid, all of us educators from a traditional setting are afraid that this is just the excuse that institutions and politicians needed to be able to take away more funding from education, put it all into technology, and further devalue the work of teachers in the classroom. So I'd like to say no, I hope not. But I also don't, I also think, even though I brought up some of the positives, overwhelmingly, I think it's not the same. And I think what we're doing is trying to rescue something and try to create something that's meaningful, but I think it's less than. And therefore, I think we can't just like accept that this is the way it's going to be. But I'm a pretty optimistic, cynical person, but optimistic person. So I try to sort of say, well, that was interesting, or that wasn't as bad as I thought. And, I'm pleasantly surprised that, there was this thing that I hadn't considered that turned out to be kind of cool. So that's just my outlook in general in life, to kind of try to look on the positive side of things a little bit, but it doesn't mean that I don't see the problems with it. And I think there's a lot of problems with it. So no, I don't think education is going to become virtual and remote. I think that brings a lot of inequalities to the forefront, and not just inequalities. Like, I think school districts and even universities are like, oh, you need a laptop, we have a laptop, but like, that's not the same, like, even if they're like, oh, we'll give you broadband and here's a laptop, it's not the same, because it still reinforces inequalities of the children who grow up in homes where everybody has a laptop versus the children who are bringing the one laptop home, and competition for that resource, but also familiarity with it and what it means to be working on a borrowed laptop as opposed to be working on your own, you know, psychologically and pedagogically. So yeah, no, I don't think it's a good thing overall.
Yeah, you talked about the challenges, we first started off by the challenges from your perspective, and then you transitioned to challenges from the student perspective. Can you think of any, specific stories or instances being in the classroom now where students have expressed, concerns specifically either with the institution that you were previously involved with, or just ways that it has impacted them in general?
Um, I think of a number of things. I mean, obviously, there's two things going on, right? One is an educational shift, and one is a health emergency. And there's three things going on. Those two, and an economic crisis. So a lot of the stories of what I heard from students kind of like were very intersectional and all of those things. But I mean, I can share that like my own son did terrible once his school went online, because his school, they had no face-to-face instruction, virtual, but face-to-face live instruction. It was all just a bunch of Google Classrooms that were set up and a lot of assignments that were sort of like dumped on. There were no videos created. And the teachers did this, bless their hearts, they did this with the best intentions, because they wanted to sort of say like some students are going to like have the school laptop and they can only use it when the school bus that is broadcasting like broadband Wi-Fi signal for them is going to be by. And so like they need to be able to go in, get all the assignments, work on them offline, and then upload them again. So I understand that they had to contend with students who had the least amount of privilege, because I live in a very unequal school district. But that being said, also those students, I'm sure many students across the board did not do well because it was not engaging, right? So it wasn't engaging at all. The only students who did well with that kind of a setup were the students who were like, that people write books about afterwards, like, oh, they went, up in the snow, uphill twice, for 5 miles, they walked to school because they wanted to learn so bad. And, that's not everybody in high school is like that, right? So like those people who are incredibly motivated, persevere in the face of adversity students, amazing, God bless them. But that's not the majority of people, right? The majority of people at the high school level like need a little convincing, and they need a little engaging to be able to be excited about learning. And so it was very difficult for my son. And he went from like straight A's and a few B's to D's across the board. So yeah, it was terrible for him. And then I had other students in my classes. One of my classes was already online. And so I think a lot of my colleagues weren't touching base with students in classes that were already virtual, asynchronous, engagement. I think they felt like nothing's changed for them in light of my class. But coming back to what I said before, like maybe educationally nothing changed, but it's also an economic and a health crisis. And their other classes all changed, right? If that was the only class that they were taking online. So for me, it was very important that I reach out to the students in that class as well and sort of say like, are you okay? Like, are you able to meet the deadlines? And what I did is I waived all late penalties for everybody, no questions asked. From spring break on. So I said, if you haven't handed in an assignment, you can hand in an assignment. I offered pass fail. And then I also offered students to skip the final project and take the grade that they had without the final project. Like then instead of being graded off 100 points, things would be graded off of 80 points. And I got a lot of really positive feedback from students on that. A lot of students still did the final project, and a lot of students, needed, like I said, no questions asked. I don't know if you need me to waive the late penalty because you have a legitimate excuse, or if you need me to waive the late penalty because the weight of reading the news is too much for you and you just want to binge your favorite series on Netflix. Like, it's not up to me to baby adults. But I know that I could use a little grace. And so I decided to give a little grace where I had it to give. And then my class that was face to face, I had a student whose mom lost her job and didn't have a laptop, so was constantly trying to use the student's laptop to try to log in and sign up for unemployment, which was something that here in Florida people took days to be able to do, of many, many hours in the system. I had another student whose mom was a healthcare worker and she got sick, so the student had to move in with her grandparents to be able to take care of them because the mom couldn't go. So very pandemic related stuff. That those are the ones that I know, right? And I've always had a core number of students who feel comfortable sharing things with me and have told me things or have been told that they can tell me things. So I'm used to hearing student stories of struggle and success, I'm happy to say. But of course, there's always people who don't say anything and you don't know, right? And so it's like, why did this person suddenly drop out? I had a student who stopped participating in the class, stopped attending Zoom sessions. But every once in a while, I could see through the e-learning that he was still checking into class. So, I reached out a couple times and I didn't get a response. I don't know if it was COVID related or not. It was a student who added late, was a student who missed class before. So, I think it exacerbated a situation that was already there before, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure it was very difficult. And with the students that you said that you're, close relatively to some students, would you say that was the approach with among, colleagues in either the department or the college or the university?
I heard the gamut from people and from students. So generally speaking, my students said when I was offering, if you can't make it to the Zoom meeting, that's fine, or all late penalties are waived, and whatever kind of flexibility I had going on, let me know if you need extra time, let me know if you need extra support. And I sent a very, like at the onset, not quite at the onset, so I would say, but a few weeks in, when it became clear that this is it, this is going to be the rest of the semester, no one's coming back, there's not going to be graduation, like all of that stuff. When that happened, I sent a really long email saying, just a very sort of concerned email and explaining my process and thinking about why I was choosing to do things the way that I was doing, and that I hoped everybody was healthy and I hoped everybody lived in a home that was supportive, because it's not just that, right? Like, what does it mean to be locked at home if your home is not conducive to learning, right? Either because it's abusive or because it's chaotic. I had a student email me to say, in my online class, and she said, this is like a godsend because I'm home, and so my aunt and uncle and my parents, like, I have to take care of my little siblings and my little cousins who are not in school while my parents and my aunt and uncle are working. So, like, she had to run school for them. They were not in school, but they were in school, right? She had to run school for 4 kids, which doesn't normally happen. And so students told me, like, oh, no professor's done this, or they're just acting like nothing. And I think I know from a couple people that they really believed that the best thing they could do was offer continuity for students. And I know lots of other people who are like, fuck this shit. This is terrible. We shouldn't be doing anything. We should just give them the grade they've earned until now, and that's that. continue to have class, but like no assignments. So I would say my colleagues ran the gamut. I would say my institution encouraged faculty to be understanding. Um, hashtag on brand, you know, just kind of like we're just suggesting. Be nice and be understanding, but not actually saying like this is the way it's going to be. This is the immediate policy starting now. So, and I understand because I'm very active with my union, and so I understand that generally, like when that happens, they'll be like, oh, we can't infringe on, you know, academic freedom from the professors, right? And that many professors, not in my field, which is a social science, but in specific fields, they were like, we can't, whatever. We can't ease things in calculus and calc 2, you know, like they need calculus 2 to be able to pass calculus 3, to be able to pass organic chemistry 2, whatever it is, you know. So there are definitely faculty teaching courses that, whether it is correct or not correct, I don't know. Probably many are, probably not all the ones they think. Really believe that, you know, their class is like they're going to sit for a licensing exam immediately after their class. And if they don't get that content in that way, then their class didn't count and they wasted their money. So, yeah.
How, of the students that kind of expressed some of those concerns, how did it make those students feel?
You know, when students would say things to me, I said that I really believe that the vast majority of my colleagues are good people who care about students and care about being good teachers. And that is absolutely true. We may really disagree on how best to accomplish that. We may really disagree on whether or not to express that to our students. You know, I have a colleague who's really old-fashioned, and we had a student in common that took many classes with both of us, and I mentioned him to him, and I was like, oh, I'll just pretend I'll make up a thing. Oh, Johnny, you know, like Johnny told me he's taking whatever class, and he's like, who's Johnny? And I said, well, Johnny's in your class, and he was in your other class, and he's taken 2 classes with me. And he said, I only know my students by last name. And so I'm like the opposite of that, right? I'm the exact opposite of that. Sometimes I don't know my students' last names. I mean, I have to, but he was a very popular professor, even though he's very old-fashioned, very popular, and really deeply cares about his students. We disagree on how to make that happen. So when students reached out to me, I would, in the midst of sort of responding to their concerns or responding to their emails, say, I believe the vast majority of my colleagues, like, we're all in this. We're all thrown for a loop. Everybody's making this up as we go along. Nobody knows how to do this. I don't necessarily believe that the vast majority of my colleagues are very empathic people. I think a lot of people hold this idea of, you know, rigor in academia and rigor in education. But I think they don't necessarily think about what is really embedded in that rigor, or if it's just rigidity, right? So that in order to say, like, you know, you did your best, you can set high standards for your students and they'll try to meet them and still be really compassionate and flexible when the time comes. So students who ask me, what I had from a lot of students, not a lot, but a large proportion of the students who reached out to me, either about my flexibility or about saying, like, I haven't gotten this elsewhere, was, for instance, in that one class where I said they could waive the final project. And meanwhile, like, I'm doing this and I'm emailing my colleagues, right? I'm like, this is the email I sent to the students. This is how I reworked my syllabus. This is how I restructured my grading. I sent it to my colleagues in my department. I sent it to my colleagues I sent it to the Dean of Undergraduate Advising. I said, if there's anything in here that's useful to anybody, take it, or if you see anything in here that's concerning, let me know. So as I was doing this, some of the students wrote back, particularly at the end of the term, and said, students who originally said, no, I'm going to do the final project. And then towards the end, they were like, I'm not going to do the final project because nobody else has given us any flexibility, right? Or this one professor not only hasn't given any flexibility, but actually gave us more work to do than was already listed, because to make up for the time we're not spending in class. And so students felt overwhelmed.
Wow, yeah, it's very different experiences. One student can have very different experiences in the classroom, for sure.
Sure.
I want to go back to something that you had mentioned about being active and a part of the union at the university, and if you can speak to any ways that the current pandemic or just changes in what work looks like, how that might have impacted your work.
Yeah, so I'm on the bargaining team in the union. I still use the present term because we were supposed to finish bargaining, in November, but here we are, still bargaining. Almost there though, almost there. And so I want to see this contract renegotiated all the way through. So with regards to the pandemic, one thing that's interesting about our faculty, our university, is there's no staff union, and there is a faculty union, but fewer than 50% of the faculty work in colleges that are union eligible, considered like in unit. So we don't represent faculty in the College of Law, the College of Medicine, and the College of Agricultural and Life Science, lots of places. We don't represent them. Vet school, pharmacy school, dental school, etc. So we don't, obviously, we cannot enrich our membership, right, with those people. And we don't represent the staff. And so we represent fewer than 50% of the faculty at the institution. And the administration knows this, and the faculty know this. So in a way, we don't really have a lot of teeth, but we're scrappy. And so very often, the university is constantly saying to us, we make policy for the whole university, not just for people in unit. We're like, well, we advocate just for people in unit. That's who we are, bound to represent. But we're happy to advocate for everybody if you want us to, right? So when we're trying to negotiate. So when the university started rolling out policies around staying home and doing remote instruction, we started thinking about what are all the things that are in our contract that are affected by these changes, right? Big stuff, right? Not like, oh, I'm paying for a parking permit and I don't need it, which is, also in there, but we didn't fight for that. Or I'm paying for my own ink to print stuff, right? But it wasn't that. It was like, what's going to happen with student evaluations? What if the evaluations suck? Because like everybody was thrown into this, like figure it out, go do it, like in the middle of the year, while also worrying about your economic bottom line. Many people have partners whose work was affected by this in other ways that they could not continue to work. So worrying about your bottom line, certainly worrying about healthcare of, self and loved ones. So the idea, came that the university could not unilaterally propose policies and needed to articulate things that needed to be bargained with the bargaining team. So we kind of put the contract on hold and worked on renegotiating what was known as like a memorandum of understanding and impact bargaining. So like the impact of COVID on our ability to, on both ends, to meet the exigencies of the contract, like work location, teaching evaluations, productivity, right? Like if you're suddenly home having to take care of children, you don't have your work environment where you might be most productive. And then that means that you're not getting your grants out on time, or you're not publishing, or you're not reviewing, things like that. So we got together to propose something based on, all these universities did something like this. And at the very beginning, we started meeting with a lot of resistance to sort of codify things into this memorandum. And we're just trying to offer protections for people who are feeling very vulnerable right now. But we came to an agreement. We signed a memorandum of understanding, and the full plan is to, that memorandum of understanding covers spring and summer. Does not cover what's going to happen next year. We can't bargain on the impact of something that hasn't happened. So they'll have to rebargain once fall comes around.
In thinking about the folks that are represented in the union, what would you say kind of the demographic of folks is?
Well, I mean, there are like people who are in unit, and then there's like membership, right? Membership are people who actually cough up 1% of their salary for union dues. And then there's like the people who are covered by the union. I mean, what's the demographic? The reality is it's a faculty union, so it's still overwhelmingly white male. That's it.
And you talked about some of the ways in which faculty were impacted that you all were trying to bargain for. Did you see, some folks more impacted than others? And thinking about it, are there any stories that, maybe people shared during some of the union meetings that particularly stood out to you in terms of impact that they were feeling?
I mean, really the stories were anxieties more than they were specific, they were fears, right? There was a lot of miscommunication. There was a lot of different communications. Sometimes the provost would send something to the deans. Some deans sent it out to their colleges, other deans did not. Or some deans sent it out to the chairs, and some chairs sent it to their departments. That was actually probably more accurate. Other chairs did not. And so you don't really, people felt unmoored by the situation. And so it was really, when people talked about impacts, is they were afraid. What does this mean? Like, when I go up for promotion next year, how will this year be evaluated? When, if my chair and I don't get along, are they going to use the fact that my, student evaluations weren't as good against me? Things like that. It wasn't really that people were saying specific situations with regards to their interactions with the university. But, the biggest impact that most people felt was having to be home. A lot of faculty were concerned about being away from the lab. Some faculty mentioned things like the conferences that we go to have all been suspended, so we can't present at the conferences. And other people said, whatever journals have stopped accepting submissions. So even if we have articles ready to go, like, our publication timeline is going to be behind. Things that matter to faculty members. I think the most, regular person situation. I did have another sort of like very faculty, like researcher kind of a thing. A friend whose research is a cohort study. And they needed like you need to meet, evaluate or observe whatever with kids. let's say I don't know exactly what the timeline difference is, but let's say, oh, we examine kids like at 6 months, at 12 months, at 18 months, and then at 24 months. And then you can't have kids come in to the lab and you can't do your observations, and you've just lost the whole cohort. It's gone because the whole design is built on that, right? And you can't get that exact timing that you need. But for the vast majority of people, the biggest issue is being at home with situations, stuck at home with situations that impacted your ability to work. Children, elderly people, spouses also working, just interruptions, and concerns. And that is in the best case scenario, right? Assuming no abuse and no toxicity. So.
And so you talked about not really being able to think or bargain for the fall because it hasn't happened yet. And, other universities might be returning to the fall, which means, faculty might be returning back to campus in the fall. So what, are your thoughts if your institution has already shared a plan? What are your thoughts about students and folks in general returning back to a university setting in the fall?
The institution did share more than one plan. The latest one, I think, involves, I don't know, something like reduced occupation of dorms, occupancy, not occupation, that sounds terrible. Reduced occupancy in dorms, and I don't know what's going on with the classroom setting per se, because I'm not going to be there. I'm on leave. So I'm taking leave. I'm transitioning to this new thing. So I didn't follow up. I know that my union will bargain come August. They will bargain a new impact once that plan is more solidified. My understanding is that the vast majority of undergraduate classes were going to be online. The concerns, the concerns are twofold, right? So there's the concern about your work, your ability to do your work, and your ability to own the work that you do, right? So the university was very supportive and said, we're going to share all this information on how to do good courses online. Lots of university professors are 9-month employees. That means we don't get paid in the summer. But we're also not supposed to work in the summer. And of course, that's a lie. Everybody works in the summer. But you work very much on your own stuff. It's an entirely different thing to spend the entire summer redesigning courses that were meant to be taught face-to-face to be taught online meaningfully, even with all the support in the world, right? They give you pages and pages and hours of free online training for you to do what they want you to do. And as great as that is, it's just more work. Anybody who's ever tried to look up, whatever, how to take out a stain online, it's just like, wait, hold on, let me read the 8th way in which I can take out this stain. So imagine like how to, learning new technology, new pedagogy, and all that stuff. So that's what they're doing. So that's one set of concerns. What does this mean about my work? If I take the university's help and if I record classes, then it's like I'm the robot that replaces me, right? I become my own replacement worker. If I create content that's so good that it can live without me, then what's the university's, incentive to keep me, right? I think that's a fear. I don't think it is a widespread probability. But I definitely think it's a possibility for some people. And so I think people are concerned about that. And then I think people are really concerned about their health. What does it mean to have, this is a college town. We empty out when students aren't here, and then it fills back up when students are here. The fall is football season. I don't know what's going to happen with that. There's a lot of vibrancy. It's really great and wonderful in a normal setting, like that just suddenly just tens of thousands of young people everywhere congregating and, you know, conversating and going places, and it takes forever to be able to buy lunch because the lines are so long and it's so loud with all the chatter. It's beautiful, but it's deadly potentially at this point. So that's a huge concern. I think the last concern that I heard, and I don't know if it's going to stay like this, but the last concern that I heard people articulating is apparently something went out from human resources to all employees saying something like, you need to prove that you have childcare available to you if you want to work from home. I think it was something like that. Because it was definitely like, if you want to work from home, then prove that you have childcare available to you. But it's like, well, some people definitely want to work from home because they don't have childcare available to them, right? Like that is part of the concern. But it's just bizarre when it's massive institution. I don't know how many employees we have, but 20,000 easily between faculty and staff. And I think that's crazy.
And so some of the concerns that you mentioned that were expressed from kind of the faculty side, I'm sure many students coming in will have similar, concerns. And in thinking about the students that you serve, overwhelmingly, have you seen Latinx students be particularly impacted by COVID and by the pandemic, and even other things, kind of, because we know other things are going on right now as well, thinking about the protests?
Yeah, I mean, I think the students that I have, because of the content that I teach, which is social science based, and who I am, the students who are drawn to me, I will say it like that. The students who have been drawn to me traditionally tend to be pretty involved. These are the things that I know. I know that Latinx and Black families have been more affected by this pandemic in ways both economic and health-wise. And so I would say it's definitely borne out with some of my students. They've had family members, close family members who've been affected, hospitalized. I've had students who've had parents lose jobs. I'm trying to think what else. I definitely have had students who saw, like their opportunity for like a summer internship that was supposed to pan out and be like the pathway, kind of, I don't want to say evaporate, but become so modified in the midst of this pandemic that it really created such a setback for them, I think, emotionally as well. And then I also see students taking this moment of increased activism and, renewed commitment to really advocate for things that they've always wanted to advocate for, and they always have, but like in a more insistent fashion. So, I see a lot of abolish ICE, hashtags, but also people are educating themselves and they're doing things. I do see people sort of mobilizing. I do not know, and I cannot speak to whether or not the students that I know, I don't have a sense of the demographics of students to say, oh, like my students or Latinx students have not been as casual, about going out, and, like they've been more concerned about spreading this or getting sick. I can't say for certainty. I've definitely had students who express that. I definitely had students that I see on social media are out doing stuff. The majority of my students come from South Florida, and I know the situation in South Florida is one of like young people going to the beach and getting together and going to bars. So I don't know I would love to think they're more responsible, or even more like miedosos, like more scaredy cat of what, what's going to happen. Maybe they live at home with a grandparent. That's, more likely if you're Latinx. But I can't speak to what that is. I don't really have a sense of it. But I know that these are communities that have been more impacted by this pandemic, both health-wise and economically. So.
Can you speak more to that? Because you said, Latinx and Black families were more impacted. Could you just expand more on what you mean by that?
I mean, it's just what the research is showing, right? All these articles are coming out and they're showing that marginalized communities are more impacted by this pandemic because a lot of essential workers are, people of color. A lot of people who service workers are people of color, delivery drivers, people who work in grocery stores, a lot of nurses are people of color, right? A lot of people who work in hospitals in, like as orderlies or at the cafeteria and so on and so forth. These are all people of color, primarily here in the cities of the United States, which is where you find those kinds of hospitals. You don't find hospitals outside of real cities for the most part. So there's that. And then there's also the fact of, last one in and first one out, right? So communities that had less inherited wealth in the community and less economic stability and more precarious, work conditions. So more likely to have lost their jobs or to have lost benefits, more likely to work in a place that might have had to close, like restaurants, for instance, and bars. So that is what I know. A lot of maids in the Latinx community, right? So like a lot of immigrant maids, and gardeners, I think largely, until there became more of an economic crisis, people kept their landscaping services for the most part. But people didn't want cleaning ladies coming to their houses. And if offices were closed because everybody went home, because the vast majority of cleaning ladies in the US, they don't clean people's houses, they clean buildings. But people aren't staying in hotels. They're overrepresented in tourism industry, right? People aren't staying in hotels. People aren't going to the office. So you don't need the cleaning service to come clean the offices every night. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know we've seen some of that impact in Gainesville as well. And so, we talked about some of the things that the university has said or done that is, a little concerning, but how, if at all, has the university helped the community, either the university community or the just greater surrounding community during COVID?
I don't know that I can speak to that so much. I can say that there are definitely people within the university, not the administration. I mean, not to shit on the administration. I can speak to the fact that there are definitely people within the university, like student groups who organized food drives, or researchers who went into overdrive, right? Like there was the doctor here who wanted a 3D print like N95 masks, when the shortage was like people are dying because they're not getting, like doctors are not getting these masks, and so on and so forth. So I know that certainly universities are, a university of this size and this caliber really has the potential to do tremendous good for the surrounding community and beyond, right? There's no question. The human capital that is concentrated in a place like this is amazing, literally the best and the brightest, right? There's no reason why more can't be done for the surrounding communities. So in with regards to COVID, I would say I don't know what the university's done. The number one thing this university could do to support the local community is it could buy its energy from the local electric company. That's the number one thing it would do, because it would be the biggest customer by far, obviously, and it would actually lower the cost of electricity for everybody in the community, especially communities at risk who are right now getting their power cut off as soon as the latest moratorium goes off, which is soon, July 17th, I think.
Can you speak more to that? Because I know, electric works differently based off of, where you're at and whatnot.
Yeah, so the city and the county, the city where I live, is very great, very progressive, little oasis of diversity, like just international and cultural and all those things. But it's a highly unequal city, and it's a highly unequal county, and it's on race, racial indicators. The average African American family here has less than 50% the wealth of the income. Sorry, not the wealth. Less than 5% the wealth. Less than 50% the income of the average non-African American family. Black boys are 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school than white boys. Just disproportionate all across the board. And one of those indicators is access to electricity, access to energy. And actually in the part of the county where which historically was inhabited by African American communities, so not newer parts of the county, but the historical parts of the county, which is east, literally east of the railroad tracks. In that area, the electricity is actually more expensive per kilowatt than here, where I live, where people certainly can afford that. So, what do you need?
The basket.
Interruptions. It's in my room. Close the door.
It's okay. It's just how we're living right now with Zoom and everything. So I
close the door. Sorry.
No worries. I want to be respectful of your time as well. And so I'll kind of end with, is there anything else you would like to share with me about your experiences with COVID that I haven't asked yet?
My experiences with what?
I can repeat it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with me about your experiences with COVID that I have not asked yet?
The thing for me is it's very, very frustrating, even though I certainly very fortunate. It's very, very frustrating to have had a lack of leadership. So, and I mean in so many different ways, to feel, I understand that nobody really knows what's going on, but like you still expect the leaders to come in and at least say that, I don't really know what's going on. We think the best course of action right now is this, and this is what we're going to do. But let's do it, together. These are the resources that we're mobilizing and putting towards it. And this is, so for me, it feels like now, July practically, didn't have to be like this. We know it didn't have to be like this. But even if everything had been the same up until, February, late February and early March, even if we had started as a nation really kind of like focusing on this in early March and did it well then, I don't feel like we'd be here now. And so it's very frustrating for me because, and it's very sad. It's very sad. And I think it's very telling that there's like a whole generation of young people that had a whole set of rituals and milestones taken away from them unnecessarily, right? And of course, you know, over 100,000 people who have died unnecessarily, and that is without us even knowing like what are the consequences for people who have been, you know, in critical condition and recovered long term. So like to think that unnecessarily we have experienced collective trauma that nevertheless has not collectivized the people is very frustrating. That's it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your experiences, feelings, and stories about this time in history. I feel weird calling it a historic time, but it really, you know, is going to be
For sure.
in the history book. So thank you so much, Rosana.
You're welcome, Jackie. Good luck with your move.